Redline Logbook here for D. Gray Man's Edo and Eastern Branch arc. And we start off with Alan slowly fading away, where he can see the moon slowly getting closer and closer to him, and he's basically saying, please stay away, I'm still, and he's basically trying to say alive, but he, of course, drifts off. That's when we see a woman get lost in a deep fog. It's just wandering around until eventually she accidentally trips over Alan's body. When she gets a good look at Alan and his separated arm, she goes, oh, it's too late for him. And that's when we jump over to Lena Lee, who at the end of the last arc got Robbie to help her search for Alan and Soman, because she couldn't find them before. That's when Tim Camp Beach starts flying through, being attacked by all those Akuma that were sent after him. They're all shooting, but of course Lena Lee and Robbie take care of all the Akuma, wipe them out. They then ask, where's Alan? And he shows them what happened to Soman and Alan and the Noah. So they understand that Soman's dead and Alan has lost his innocence and is possibly dead himself. When they go to the area where Alan's body should be, he's no longer there. All there's left are the playing cards. Robbie picks up the ace, and of course the ace is covered in Alan's blood. And before he can, and Lena Lee can properly search, they're then called back to the ship. Back at the ship, they are introduced to Juan, the man who's the number 2 at the Asian branch. He apparently personally knows Lena Lee, which makes sense because she's from China, so she most likely was a part of this branch first before transferred to the headquarters. He tells them that their branch has taken custody of Alan's body, and Lena Lee immediately just jumps at him and says, is Alan alive? Is he okay? Can we see him? And he doesn't even respond to any of that. He barely can even look her in the eye. He just tells them, you must set sail right now. They must be responsible. They must continue their mission and leave Alan here. The fact is, Alan's innocence was destroyed, so even if he did recover, it's not like he can go with them. He's no longer an exorcist. As you can imagine, Lena Lee didn't want to hear any of that. On the other hand, it doesn't really make sense to them why they can't go see Alan right now, because it's going to take time for their boat to be repaired. But that's when Juan says, oh, don't worry, we have a new exorcist that will be joining your group, and she can get the ship up and running right now. And Miranda's back, everybody, and she looks really healthy. Usually I can't say that about this woman, but no, she's back and she's ready to go as an exorcist. She has to take a few deep breaths because she's still Miranda after all. She then grabs onto her shoulder, which is this disc-looking thing, pulls it down her arm sleeve, and it locks into her wrist, which means this is now her new container for her innocence. So they most likely took apart her clock, which she probably cried over watching that happen, and then turned it into this disc thing so she can now have a portable item to use her innocence. And yes, Miranda has fully mastered her time record ability. She activates it, and the ship is completely repaired itself. All that time of it being destroyed is sucked into her time record. And this is where things get morbid for Miranda again. I know, she just got back, she's being morbid. Okay, so everyone freaks out by the fact that the ship just repaired itself, and it's unclear to Miranda if they're happy about this or mad, because once again, this made repairing their ship so much easier. But on the other hand, some of them did want to go see Alan, see how he's doing. So Miranda's response isn't to ask them how they're feeling or try to understand the situation at all. Her solution is to drown herself. That is not a joke. She literally jumps into the sea and tries to drown herself, and Robbie has to save her because Miranda, after this is all said and done, you notice that Miranda is wearing a different type of extras outfit as everyone else. These are actually the Mark II extras outfits that are more durable than the originals. In fact, she has an entire suitcase filled for the rest of them. So as they're getting dressed, Lena Lee is still, of course, depressed. And this, of course, angers Robbie, who punches out a window and starts yelling at her, telling her that this is war. You have to just push through this. This is going to happen. Losing allies. People dying. That's just how it goes. She doesn't even look at him. She just continues to stare into space and then starts to cry. As you can imagine, everyone freaks out about that. Bookman then hits Robbie and apologizes to Lena Lee and then drags him away. Robbie's like, nothing I said was wrong. And then Bookman glares at him and says, do you see yourself as an apostle of God? Because you're not. You are the successor of the Bookman. We are not our allies. We are not part of this war. Your job is to keep a record of this war. We're on the Black Order side of this war by chance, and only chance. And he basically tells Robbie never to forget that. And of course, Robbie's response is, okay, I won't. But it's clear that Robbie has no interest in just being a bookman. He definitely wants to be on Alan and Lena Lee's side. He wants to fight for the world, but he can't because he's a bookman. And then Bookman raises his voice so Lena Lee can hear him, and he says, I don't believe that Alan is going to die. This boy was prophesied to be the destroyer of time. And do you know what a millennium is? It's time. So, this boy might be prophesied to be the destroyer of the Millennium Earl. And if he's destined to defeat the Earl and end this war, then he must return. Anatia and Monja Once again, these are Chinese names, so I'm not even sure I'm getting them right. Discussing how Anatia has finally shown some spirit in the last few days, and she points out that this is the first time she had hoped that Cross is alive, and she's grateful that Manja is there with her on this journey to find Cross. They then hear the breaking of the glass when Robbie punched it to try to convince Lena Lee to focus. Monja goes inside, sees it, and they immediately just point at Robbie and say it was him. She's about to beat the hell out of him, but that's when Miranda shows how her innocence works, and it just heals the broken glass. She then explains that her ability can rewind any damage to the ship or even to people, so their wounds will automatically heal. But this is not a convenient power. In fact, it's quite cruel, because at a certain point she has to release her ability, and when that happens, all that damage has to return to the original owner, which means anyone who gets a fatal wound, even if they're still alive because of the reversing of time, once it goes back to them, they will die. Anatia says, okay, I'll tell my crew about this, but are you going to be okay? Because that means you can't sleep while your ability's activated. And Edo is a 5-day trip by boat. And Miranda says, once again, something very depressing. It's fine. I've stayed for 10 days because I was worried that I might get fired at my job, so I can handle this. And as you can imagine, everyone is very disturbed and question, are they even going to survive this trip, let alone get to Edo? We then go back to Alan in some kind of weird dream state where he's wandering around like a half-dead doll. In fact, he even questions if he's in the afterlife. And he starts to just walk around. He looks at the moon that's pure white, but when he looks at the reflection of the water, the moon is black. And so he looks deeper into the water, and what he sees is basically Lena Lee's dream that she's been having for days now, where she's sitting on the ruins of the Black Order surrounded by black water and everyone's dead inside with a black moon, and basically his dream is the reverse. And there she is, Lena Lee, crying, which heavily implies that this dream is more like a vision that the innocence that they both have is giving them, and so they're able to connect their visions. But anyway, Lena Lee is of course crying in her dream, and Alan is trying to get to her. He reaches out, but as he does go for the water, it then turns to ice. The ice then shatters. A shadowy figure grabs his arm and says, "You can't go." And all Alan can think to himself is, who are you? What are you? And then Alan wakes up. As I said before, he was taken in by the Eastern Branch, so he's in their medical bed. He's being watched by the woman that found his body, but she's currently asleep. And Alan decides he's going to go for a walk, because that's who he is. He's Alan Walker. Just as he promised Amana, he's going to keep moving. And we learn how Alan survived. After his innocence was shattered and he had that piece of his heart bitten out, his innocence, now that it was formless, decided to create a blockage in that hole, stopping him from bleeding to death, allowing his heart to keep pumping. Yes, his innocence unilaterally saved his life once again, but usually it saved his life by attacking Akuma. This is the first time it took an entirely different form to save his life. It turned into, well, basically a part of a heart, part of his heart. And so Alan actually begins to think about what happened to him, how he had a sense of fear, a sense of trying to escape but not being able to. And he realizes this feeling was death. What he felt was death. He then starts to cry, and he actually questions why he's crying. Is he crying because he's happy that he's alive? Or is he crying because he couldn't save Soman? He just doesn't understand what his feelings are right now. And he actually calls out to Mana, which he hasn't done in a long time. You gotta remember, Alan's 15. He's still a child, and he's just experienced death. And so when Juan gets back to Alan's room to change his bandages, which apparently was Juan's job this entire time, Alan's just gone. Juan freaks the fuck out and starts just charging down the halls looking for Alan. It makes perfect sense. I mean, if you were responsible for taking care of him and all of a sudden your patient is just gone, I'd freak out too. Alan eventually finds his way in front of the front door, and he's trying to push it open, but then a man in the back says, no matter how hard you push, you're never going to open it. My great-grandfather sealed that door with a god. No one can open it. Alan doesn't care. He just asks him to open the door so he can continue to walk, because all he wants to do right now is walk. He doesn't want to stand still. And the man says, even without your left arm? Obviously, Alan takes this as him picking a fight, but he wasn't. He was just trying to get Alan's attention so they get a proper talk. This man is Bak Chan. He is the head of the Eastern Branch, and he basically is asking Alan if he wishes to be a personnel there. Now that he no longer has his innocence, he can't be an extras anymore. So why not become a supporter, or maybe join the science team? He can still support the Black Order without actually being on the front lines. And he tells Alan that he's sure God will forgive him even if he gives up right now. And Alan's response is he doesn't care what God thinks. He didn't make his oath to him. He made his oath to himself to free the Akuma, to his friends to fight by their side, to the world to save it, and finally to his father that he wouldn't stop walking. He then starts to punch the gate until eventually he starts bleeding from his remaining hand, and he demands that he open the gate because this is the only path he knows, the path of an exorcist. Bach then says, "Good, this was really just a test. Your innocence is still alive. You can still be an exorcist. We just had to make sure that your mindset was still there, because if you weren't sure and we just gave back your innocence, then you could have turned into a fallen, and we couldn't let that happen." Other than the part where he said he didn't care what God thought, that was a little too much. But yeah, they're happy that he's ready to still be an exorcist, and he's going to help him get his arm back, so Alan can hurry up and catch up with his friends and fight with them once more. Alan gets so excited about this, he's finally been able to get his arm back, get his innocence back. He'll be able to be an exorcist still. That's great news. And before Bach has a chance to explain to him how he's going to do this, that's when the girl that saved Alan in the woods came out of nowhere and just kicks Bach in the head, yelling at Alan, mad at him that he would just slip away while he was in medical care. And yeah, she actively kicked Bach in the head because Alan ran away. Bach is confused and asked, "Why did you hit me if he's the one you're yelling at?" And she just ignores him. She doesn't care. Basically, seems to be the relationship that you'll see throughout the rest of this arc, that these two are kind of like family. Her name is Fu, and she demands that Alan thank her for saving his life because she was the one who brought him back. Alan, of course, does thank her, and that's when Alan realized, oh yeah, he would have died without these people. And so he decides to genuinely thank all of them. Every single person in the Eastern Branch for saving his life. After Alan is done thanking everyone for saving him, they then explain to him what the Eastern Branch is and take him to his innocence. So the Eastern Branch apparently was a cave originally, and over the centuries they just slowly expanded outwards, making more and more room, to the point where the whole place is now basically a maze. In fact, they're still expanding to this day, and so it's very easy for people to get lost and actually die of starvation because they can't find their way back to everyone else. But this also means they have a bunch of extra rooms where they're not being used. And so they take Alan to a specific room that's covered in fog. A nice thick fog that just layers everywhere. It's slowly spiraling around. Alan's confused why he was brought here until he's explained that this fog isn't fog. In fact, his innocence. When his nearly dead body was brought back to the Eastern Branch, this fog, his innocence, followed behind him, and then they decided to store it in this room. Alan asked how was this possible after his innocence was destroyed, and their answer is, we don't know. Both Bach and Kamui talked about it with their science teams, and neither could figure this out. This is unprecedented. This makes no sense. The fact that his innocence, after being destroyed, survived, and not just that, but it actively made sure Alan survived as well, and continued to stay with him. The only explanation Kamui could come up with was an unscientific one, which was, maybe Alan's special. Maybe he's loved by God. Basically, Bach's plan is to have Alan activate his innocence and have it just come back to him. Simple and easy, right? And of course, this is an interest for many people, including 3 rookie scientists of the Eastern Branch, who just come in and want to witness what happens. These being Ricky, Rufia, and Shifu. Once again, I'm not good with Chinese names, so just bear with it. Once again, these 3 are super excited to see a once-in-a-lifetime chance to have someone activate their innocence that's been destroyed. Rofa, the girl of the group, finally gets to see Alan for the first time, and she immediately falls in love with him at first sight. I don't know, I guess Chinese girls really like Alan. I know it's never been confirmed that Lin Li has feelings for him, but still. So, Alan reaches his stump out and evokes his innocence, and the mist then comes together, forms into his left arm, and there it is. His claw is back. And as soon as he's able to get it back, it then shatters back into mist again. So all that hope Alan felt for that first second is immediately disappeared the next. And he just tries to evoke it again and again and again. And hours go by and he's still going and nothing's changed. He can get it back for a second, and then the next it shatters. And now the science team are doing what the science team do best. They theorize why it's not working and trying to figure out the proper way to do it, but none of them can think of an idea. Alan, on the other hand, is now exhausted himself after trying to activate his innocence over and over again, but he hasn't given up. He's going to do this, he says. As the day passes, or multiple days pass, Alan continues to try to invoke his innocence, and it still doesn't work. In fact, it's becoming more and more aggressive towards him as he tries to force it, because at a certain point, he just launches him back. He even tries talking to his innocence, trying to ask why it won't let it evoke his innocence. Why can't he do it right now? What's wrong? Alan's beginning to freak out because once again, he's going in the opposite direction. It's actually getting harder for him to invoke his innocence, not easier, as he tries more and more. And then there's the thought of what Lin Li was like in his dream, where she was surrounded by devastation and black water crying, and now he's just desperate to get back to her. Of course, this is Alan Walker, someone who was taught to walk whenever things get bad. Basically, keep moving forward, never give up. And so that's exactly what he does. He decides to pop back up, literally and he smacks Bach right in the mouth when Bach was about to say something to him. And he definitely breaks a few teeth because his mouth is bleeding. Besides getting his mouth busted open and cracking a few teeth, Bach also dropped a bunch of his files. Alan decides to help him pick them up, but he realizes these aren't files. These are pictures of Lena Lee. Bach then grabbed all of the pictures away from Alan and says, I'm not a stalker. I'm definitely not a stalker. Yeah, this is going to get really weird. As you'd imagine, he's in love with Lena Lee, and when Alan realizes this, Bach then starts to break out into hives. Apparently, this happens to him anytime he gets overly stressed out. The issue is, kind of creepy they have that many photos of Lena Lee, I'm just saying. So the fact that you're stressed out about this is you kind of deserve it. Anyway, he is now bedridden because of his hives, which doesn't make any sense. That's not how hives work. So even though he's been bedridden by hives, once again, doesn't make sense, he's now going to tell Alan what he was going to tell him before he got smacked in the mouth, which is because he's a paramecia type and not an equip type innocence user, there's different ways of activation. So for an equipment type, the innocence is of course outside the body, and as a result of this, it has tendency to be overwhelming raw power that the extras can't handle. And so what they normally do is modify the innocence into a workable object that can be used by the exorcist. This lessens the burden on them and allows them to do their job properly. But a paramecia types, the innocence is inside of them, and so it works basically instinctively from its purest form. And so Alan's never really had to think about activating his innocence or even what his innocence is. And so Bach points out to him that you don't actually understand your innocence, and that's why you can't activate it. Just like how the research teams have to understand the innocence for other exorcists and turn it into a weapon for them, it's now time for you to learn how your innocence operates, what it really is, so then you can merge back with it properly. And Bach has a plan to speed up the process. He gets up and he tells Alan to follow him, and they go all the way to the front gate. Bach then calls for Fu, and she just comes out of the doorway. So apparently, Fu was created from the crystallized god that his great-grandfather was able to capture. He also created Fu from it, an artificial life form, the guardian of the Eastern Branch, which means Fu has got to be over 100 years old at this point. Must be nice, not aging. But anyway, Bach's plan is quite simple. Alan is going to learn about the essence of his innocence, trial by fire. Basically, Fu and Alan are going to fight to the death, forcing Alan to activate his innocence. And Fu does not hold back. She's able to transform her arms into scythes, speed blitz Alan, puts one of them to his neck, and then kicks him into a wall. And then tells Alan, if you don't take this seriously, I really am going to kill you. That's when Bach realized this plan was a terrible idea and decides to call it off. But Alan's like, no. I like this. This is the best way for me to learn about my innocence. So now a half-dead Alan is going to have to fight for his life with one arm, trying to activate his innocence against Fu. And so Alan and Fu are basically fighting each other for over 10 hours at a certain point. And Alan is getting his ass kicked. Every time he tries to activate his innocence, it still doesn't work, but they're not stopping. Alan is giving everything he has to try to unlock his innocence, and it's just not working. That's when those three rookie scientists decide to show up to basically spy on Alan, specifically Rofo. She basically dragged the other two along because she wanted to spy on Alan because, once again, she has a crush on him. And they basically watch for a few seconds until they see Alan get his head cut off, or at least it should have, because Fu's scythe goes straight through his neck. And the only reason why his head's still attached is because Fu, at that moment, started to phase out of reality. Apparently, she has to sleep, which charges her back up. It's kind of like she has a battery, otherwise she can't maintain her form. Which, okay, that makes sense. She is an artificial life form. Also, Alan's been fighting for 10 hours straight, so he also passes out immediately afterwards. As you can imagine, Alan and Fu were being filmed by golems, and so when Bach sees that the three rookies are right there, he orders them to take Alan to his room. Also, he punishes them because they weren't supposed to be there, even though they were ordered not to be. While this is happening, Bach is also on the phone with Kamui. They're basically just doing an update on Alan and his innocence. Nothing really in particular. Kamui's just worried about Alan, like always. Kamui really is a great leader to have. But before he can get more information on Alan, Kamui has to hang up the phone because two of the generals have finally arrived to headquarters. General Cloud and General Soko. The two of them decide to wait in the church because General Cloud wanted to mourn her apprentices that were killed by Tiki Meek. General Soko, on the other hand, doesn't seem to give a shit. He basically believes that if you're weak, you die, that's your problem. Basically, his view is that you shouldn't mourn the incompetent. But this also means we finally got introduced to all of the generals. We've seen Cross, we've seen Jefferson. Technically, we saw Yagner, even though he was on the verge of death. And now we've seen Cloud and Soko. That's 5 generals. Well, those are the 5 exorcist generals. That is when Kamui walks in and he tells them that the 5 supreme generals are waiting for them. We've already met the supreme generals. They were the guys who were with Harubiska whenever Alan got his innocence analyzed by her. If you can remember all the way back in the first arc, those were the 5 dudes sitting in the chairs watching the whole thing. And that is when we finally get to see what is happening to the rest of Cross's search team. While they're sailing through the seas all to Edo, in the sky hovers a level 3 Akuma. And that is where I'll leave off in this video, because this arc is very long, so it's going to have to be done in multiple parts. Alright, so if you enjoy this video, subscribe, give it a thumbs up so you enjoy more D. Gray Man, other many things. Thank you and have a great day.